Okay, so let's dive into this really tragic story from Uttar Pradesh, India. It all starts with something so simple, so everyday, a new pair of shoes. But what began as a small argument over who would wear them first ended in a way no one could have ever imagined.
I mean, just read that sentence. It's one of those headlines that just stops you in your tracks, right? You have to read it again because the cause, a pair of shoes, and the effect just seems so worlds apart. So what happened here?
So, at the center of this are two brothers, 16 and 15 years old, barely a year apart. You can just imagine them growing up together, sharing a room, sharing their lives, and now one is gone and the other stands accused of taking his life.
So let's try to understand how this unfolded. How does a simple fight between two brothers escalate into something so final, so tragic?
It all happened so fast. The argument kicked off around 10:30 in the morning, but within just a few minutes, it wasn't just words anymore. In what must have been a moment of pure rage, police say the older brother grabbed a pair of scissors. The younger brother collapsed, with injuries to his head and hands. He was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. He was declared dead. The whole thing, from a silly argument to a death, took place in less time than it takes to have breakfast.
Now, it's really tempting to look at this and just think, wow, what a terrible freak accident. A single horrifying burst of anger. But when you zoom out and look at the bigger picture, you gotta ask, is this really just an isolated incident?
And, well, when you start digging into the data, the answer is pretty unsettling. It seems this tragedy, as extreme as it is, might actually be part of a much larger and, frankly, more disturbing trend happening in the state. The numbers here are pretty stark. According to the National Crime Records Bureau, there was a nearly 33% jump in cases involving minors in conflict with the law in Uttar Pradesh in just 2 years. That's not just a little bump, that's a massive spike.
But here's what makes that number truly shocking. While this was happening in Uttar Pradesh, the rest of India was actually seeing a slight drop in these kinds of cases. So this tragedy didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened against the backdrop of what seems to be a growing crisis in this one state.
Okay, so that brings us to the legal system. And this is where things get really complicated, because the accused killer is legally still a child. And for cases like this, a very specific and powerful group has to step in. This is the Juvenile Justice Board, or the JJB. Think of it less like a standard court and more like a specialized panel. It exists because the law understands that teenagers are, well, they're still under construction. Their brains, their ability to understand consequences, it's just not the same as an adult's. And for this 16-year-old, this board holds his entire future in its hands. And if you look at who's actually on this board, it's designed to be a mix of expertise. You've got the legal side covered with a magistrate, but you also have 2 social workers. The idea is to get a full, holistic view of the child and their situation, not just the crime itself.
And that leads us to the biggest, most critical decision this board has to make. It's a question that will literally define the rest of this young man's life. Should he be treated as a child who made a horrific mistake or as an adult criminal? Now, they don't just flip a coin. They have to do a really detailed assessment. They're asking some pretty deep questions. Was he mentally mature enough to plan this? Did he actually get the finality of what he was doing? That the consequences were permanent? And what were the exact circumstances that led to that moment of violence?
And the 2 possible outcomes here could not be more different. I mean, look at this. If he's tried as a juvenile, the goal is rehabilitation. The maximum sentence is 3 years in a special home. But if they decide to try him as an adult, the focus flips entirely to punishment. We're talking 10, maybe 20 years in a regular prison. This one decision changes everything.
But no matter what the court decides, you're still left with this incredible human tragedy. And to even begin to understand how this could happen, we have to look past the law and into the bond at the very heart of this story, the complicated, powerful bond between siblings. Psychologists have a really interesting way of describing this. They say sibling relationships are our most enduring, meaning they last longer than almost any other relationship in our lives. But at the same time, they're emotionally ambivalent. It's a fancy way of saying they're this constant mix of love and rivalry. And that's really the paradox, isn't it? Your sibling can be your greatest ally, your confidant, the one person you trust with anything, but they can also be your fiercest competitor, sometimes in the very same day. In this case, it seems a single fleeting moment of conflict completely wiped out a lifetime of that support. And so this whole story leaves us right here with this incredibly difficult question. One child is dead.
Another stands accused. How do you, as a family or as a society, balance the need for accountability for such a terrible act with the idea that the person responsible is still a child who might be rehabilitated? In a situation this broken, what does justice even look like?